This is Pat Boone, host of the Inner Strengths Foundry podcast. I believe we are all fearfully and wonderfully made, and I help husbands, fathers, and providers understand what that means for them so they are more valuable to their friends, family, and organizations. I accomplish this by working through organizations and individuals to build their inner strengths. I've held several positions in the public and private sectors and in leadership positions for the past 17 years. I've owned and operated my own business, and I am also a Christian. I love to learn and have focused my learning around science and psychology, the Bible, and gathering bits of wisdom from my almost quarter century of experience being a husband, father, and provider. I pull from all these areas during this podcast and in my life coaching practice. The Inner Strengths Foundry podcast serves two purposes. One, to help you build your inner strengths by providing knowledge, hope, and perspective. And two, to help me build my inner strengths so I can be even more effective to you. Depending on who you talk to, we make anywhere from 120 to 35,000 decisions every day. It could be conscious, could be unconscious. And these decisions range in from what we wear, what we eat, to who we should marry and what our career should be. Decisions can be life-altering. This episode focuses on decision-making challenges that men often face by discussing decision-making models, cognitive biases, risks assessments, ethical decision-making. It aims to help listeners make more informed and effective choices in their relationships, in their careers, in their parenting lives. Today, I want to focus more on those life-altering decisions. And I'll share the story of how I met my wife and why I chose to pursue her. In the first segment, we're going to discuss the unique challenges that men face, such as career choices, relationships, and family responsibilities. So guys, we deal with a lot of challenges. I'm seeing more and more people talking about men's problems online, men and women who want to help men. And that's a good thing. Understanding that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to provide and be relevant, to be leaders without being the boss, to love and discipline. We worry about who we are, what we should do, and whether we're worthy or not. Every day, we're faced with a plethora of decisions. People looking to us to make the right call. We wonder, if I make this decision, will it kill my career? Will my marriage suffer? How will my kids be affected? We don't know what to do, so we put it off hoping it goes away. Well, newsflash, it doesn't go away, so you might as well deal with it now. At the end of the day, we want peace. We want to be loved. We want to subdue our portion of the earth. And I want you to know that it's possible. It is possible to have those things, but you'll likely need to make some tough decisions, so let's get into how to do that. So in the next segment, I want to take a look at a decision-making model, explain the relevance and discuss how understanding, the benefits of understanding what this decision-making or how this decision-making will help. So 15 years ago, I took a Myers-Briggs test to help me understand my personality and how I make decisions. Myers-Briggs breaks out personalities in 16 types based on 4 dichotomies. So the first dichotomy is where you prefer to focus your attention and where you get your energy. So it's on one side, it's extroversion. On the other side, it's introversion. The second dichotomy is how you prefer to take in information. Is it more sensing or is it more intuition, using your gut? The third dichotomy is how you make decisions. Is it more thinking or is it feeling? And lastly, the last dichotomy is how you deal with the outer world. Is it judging or perceiving? So I uploaded a tool on my website which explains each of these in more detail. The link is in the description of this video. And I'll try to create a link at the end of this video as well to make it easier for you to download that tool. My preference is INTP, so introversion, intuition, thinking, and perceiving, which means I engage my internal resources rather than talking through an issue. I look for patterns of information. I focus on the big picture. I'm, more flexible and spontaneous in decision making. So great at on-the-spot decisions, but I discovered over time that through making many mistakes, that I need support for those larger decisions that require a little bit more detailed analysis. The great thing about having this knowledge of yourself is that you have that objective view of your tendencies and science-backed guidance in how you can grow to be more rounded in your decision making. Although I never considered this because I didn't know about it at the time, when I chose my wife, we ended up being a good team when it comes to making decisions. So I'll share that now. When I was going to university, I worked for an accountant. Great mix. Learning about accounting in university, learning about taxes and accounting in real life was a great mix. And one day, this very cute girl walked in the office, and my boss was busy, so I went out to meet her. And she introduced herself as Kathy, and that she wanted to drop her books off. He was her accountant for years, and she was dropping her books off to have her taxes done. And she asked me how long it would take, and I, tongue-in-cheek, replied back, "Well, that depends on how well the bookkeeping is done." Just trying to make a joke because, well, I was flirting. Well, I embarrassed her, and so I told her it would take a couple of days, and we would get back to her. So I immediately took her books into my office and created an account for her on my tax software. I started putting all her information in, and I noticed that, she had a job. She ran her own business. She owned her house. She was doing renovations to her house. She had a church receipt. So all those things told me that, okay, she's a hard worker, first of all. She can handle money. She had the same or similar beliefs that I had, a Christian background. And so I decided that I wanted to at least go on a date with her. So I asked my boss, thinking, well, it might be a conflict of interest. So I may not be allowed to do it. So I asked him, and he just looks at me and says, "I do it all the time." So the opportunity presented itself, and I called her up and I asked her out, and the rest is history. There's all sorts of other stories I can add in there, but the important piece here is that I used facts to assess whether I wanted to pursue her. I didn't. Yes, she was very cute, and there was the whole attraction there and physical attraction, but I actually used. I had been through some previous experiences with girlfriends and so forth that didn't work out, and so I decided to change my ways a little bit and start looking for some different things. So the point being is I made a rational decision, and 26 years later, we're still together. Now, we've had some ups and downs, but that's okay. Because she had a totally different personality from me. Her personality was list 10 ways why something wouldn't work, and I was taking that personally. But once we went through our tough phase, I understood how she worked. We went through some coaching and counseling and so forth. I engaged with her differently. I thought, okay, well, if that's her strengths, then I shouldn't be taking that personally, but I should still use it. So I would share a dream with her, and immediately she would get into why it wouldn't work, whatever that it was. But after I learned how she worked, I would mentally sort those things that she said into, that's not a problem, that's a good thing to consider, and whoa, I never even thought of that. I better kind of go back to the drawing board here. And so our relationship didn't suffer. She felt heard because I was listening to her, and I didn't feel like my dreams were being killed. So just by listening to my wife, my decisions improved simply by learning about my tendencies and my wife's tendencies and integrating them into my thinking process. This next segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about overcoming cognitive biases. Cognitive bias refers to systematic patterns of deviation from rationality in judgment and decision making. These biases can lead people to perceive information and make decisions in ways that may not align with objective reality. So, cognitive biases are a natural part of human thinking, but understanding them is crucial because they can influence our judgments and actions in both positive and negative ways. So, here are three common cognitive biases. Planning fallacy, and I have struggled with this my entire life, which I know is ironic because I'm a project manager. However, planning fallacy is a cognitive bias in which individuals tend to underestimate time, costs, risks of future actions, and overestimate the benefits. So essentially, people are overly optimistic about the outcomes and the time required to complete a task or a project. So a perfect example of this is a major home renovation. You may look at the renovation, maybe you have some knowledge, I don't know. You estimate that it'll take 6 months to complete, and it's going to cost $50,000. But research and other people talking who have been through these types of renovations show that it's more like 10 months and $70,000. But you're just going to run with your gut, set aside 50 or get a loan for 50 and set aside 6 months to deal with that renovation. So it's more gut based, and you're being overly optimistic about the schedule and budget. And that could lead to a lot of problems, especially if a lot of the research says you're off by 20,000 and you're off by 4 months. So that's the planning fallacy, the over-optimistic. Second is authority bias. So this cognitive bias is where individuals tend to place undue weight on the opinions and guidance of authority figures. So parents often serve as significant authority figures in a child's life, and their opinions can carry substantial influence. So a perfect example from my own life is my father told me from the time I was in high school that I need to go get a degree and then get a job in government, work 30 years, and I can do whatever I wanted to do after I retired. I tried that, didn't work out for me, but it held me back for years because that's what I shot for. I went and got my degree, little rocky in that process, and then eventually got into government, was there 11 years, worked with some great people, but the whole culture just wasn't for me. I'm actually better working on the outside as a consultant, working with those people, so which I am now, so that worked out. But my father was that authority bias that it ended up holding me back quite a few years. And then finally, confirmation bias. It's a cognitive bias that involves seeking, interpreting, and remembering information in a way that confirms pre-existing beliefs while avoiding or discounting information that contradicts those beliefs. It's a tendency to favor information that supports one's existing views, leading to a selective perception of reality. So in your career, it may hold you back in your career. Maybe you are more meant to be like I made the move from government to consulting. It may hold you back. And for example, healthcare coverage. You may hate every aspect of your job, but you have health coverage, and somebody gets sick, and your health coverage kicks in. You may say, "Oh well, that's proof that I need to stay in this job because somebody may get sick, and I have the health coverage to cover that." Yeah, it's possible that could be a wise decision, but if every other aspect of the job you hate, you really need to think about your situation and maybe make some changes. An example in marriage, like holding people back in a relationship. You might be in an unhealthy relationship. You may downplay or dismiss signs of dysfunction or abuse, and it can end up destroying many lives in the process. And spiritually, in terms of the confirmation bias, selective interpretation of the Bible. Avoiding contradictory views, cherry-picking evidence. I mean, going back to the marriage in the abuse, you may say, yes, I'm in an abusive relationship, but divorce is a sin. Bible says so. So you choose to say, well, the Bible also says your body is a temple, so why are you allowing it to be abused? So in areas like these, seeking guidance is important. So that's one of the best ways to get through these cognitive biases, is to seek guidance and seek an objective view of the situation to help you think through things a little bit more clearly. Cognitive biases are not solely determined by one personality traits. Even though your personality can be an impact or can be an influence on the type of cognitive bias that you struggle with, it's not the only thing. Cognitive bias operates at the subconscious level, and we need to remember that. So you might be under time pressure, in situations where you need to make a decision quickly, you may rely on that that cognitive bias. Emotional factors. You're in a high emotional state. There may be some external influences, so social or peer pressure. Persuasive communication from others can also affect cognitive bias. So understanding and awareness of the bias making a deliberate effort to mitigate them through critical thinking and analysis are essential tools and processes to go through in order to make a sound decision. Next, I want to talk a little bit about balancing risk and reward. So a part of making decisions is working through the risks related to each decision that we need to make. Relationship risks, financial risks, safety, privacy, social risks. These are all examples of risk areas that need to be considered to varying degrees depending on the type and the scope of decision. In project management, the bigger the project, often the more guidance is sought. And I've been on several projects where an expert or steering committee was established. So members from relevant backgrounds are brought in to guide project decisions, and a lot of times these steering committee or expert committee are potentially even retired individuals who've kind of been through whatever we're going through, the type of project that we're working on, and bring a lot of value to making decisions and mitigating risk. When making personal decisions, the first thing you need to decide is what, if any, guidance do you need to bring in to help? Who can consult you? Who is good at asking questions and digging into a topic or an issue? You're managing risk by involving other perspectives in the process. Another process in project management is risk management. Typically, again, many people are involved in this process, but not always. And in the process, risks are brainstormed using prompts like risk categories posted around the room. And then risk responses are brainstormed by those individuals for each risk. So some risks can be mitigated, which is lowering the probability or the impact on the project. Some risks can be avoided altogether by working maybe with a particular supplier or purchasing a specific piece of equipment. The point is that risks are managed thoughtfully and with care. So in order to implement this risk management at home, maybe you want to start recording notes on your phone. Bring some people together. List some of the risks. Talk to people. Get their thoughts. Record them in your notes. Consider carefully your actions based on the feedback received. It's important to write them down or type them out so you can refer back to them later. Plus, it helps with communicating with your wife. Next, I want to talk a little bit about ethical decision making. So, of course, there are legal, social, cultural considerations to account for in deciding a course of action. We also need to consider short and long-term consequences for each choice. However, there are a couple of important points I want to briefly discuss here. The first is considering your emotional state before making a decision, especially one that can have long-term consequences. Now, I agree that emotions can be a tool to push you into action, but emotions are not always, and very rarely, I would say, good guides for making decisions. If you are overly angry, sad, afraid, or even happy, I encourage you to hold off on making a decision that could significantly or permanently impact your life and the lives of your family. Having the same argument with your spouse, dealing with a disobedient child, jerk of a boss, all good reasons to consider change, but not necessarily drastic change, and certainly not directly after the event. Give yourself a solid 72 hours to settle down and think about options. Talk to people. Seek professional guidance. Reduce risk of making a decision that you'll regret later on. The second area I wanted to discuss, and it's one that we typically forget about, and this is from a Christian perspective, God has provided us tools and guidance on how to make solid decisions. Praying for wisdom, exercising our faith, trusting God, considering the eternal perspective of a situation. These are all good tools to use when considering a decision. And one in particular, forgiveness, is especially crucial when it's ourselves that needs to be forgiven. That decision you made 20 years ago that impacted you and your family has no bearing on this current decision. The two simply aren't connected. And this is something that took me 20 years to learn. The decision I made to go into business that ended up failing, which is time for another story for another time, I had to forgive myself 15 years later, 20 years later, in order for me to move on and start something new. So we're nearing the end of our time. I want to take just a couple of minutes here to review our key takeaways. So first, we recognize we make a lot of decisions each day. And so making good decisions is very important. Second, understanding our personality and our worldview is an important factor in decision making. Cognitive bias, which is our mental capacity to ignore rational thought based on preconceived thoughts or ideas or beliefs, can throw us off from making good decisions. And finally, managing risk by seeking guidance and not making decisions while in an emotional state is important in making sound decisions. So that's the episode this week. Thank you so much for joining me. If you want to learn more, or you have an important decision you need to make, or want an objective perspective, please reach out. You can connect through my website, www.coachpatboone.com, or on Facebook at innerstrengthsfoundry.com, and that's my Facebook page. Next week, we talk about faith and critical thinking. This is Pat Boone. Thank you again for joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful week.